Good morning. It is Monday, February 7th, 2022, and this is DC Signal to Noise. Since we last checked in, which was just last Thursday, so that we could get caught up on a bunch of issues, the Olympics in Beijing have officially started. The rally in soybeans and soybean meal not only continued, they accelerated. March beans gapped higher in the overnight session. Corn and wheat futures also trading higher this morning. Midwest is looking at a seasonal week weather-wise, while dry areas of Argentina and Brazil are expected to remain dry and get drier in the week ahead. I'm AgriTalk host Chip Flory, and that is Pro Farmer Policy Analyst Jim Wiesemeyer. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning. And that dry weather in Brazil, Chip, was likely the reason behind that big unknown destination sale with most people think is China, 507,000 tons today from USDA, Chip.
Yeah,
of beans.
Yeah, of beans, old and new crop on
old
that,
and
Jim.
New, half and half.
See, this all gets down to the timing, doesn't it? Because the big concern is when they looked at the supplies that were coming out of Brazil after a short crop last year, they got into that June, July window where there really wasn't any soybeans left available out of South America, and that May into June period. Well, the June period is when we put in the old contract highs up around in the $16 area. So there's a lot of concern over the supply of soybeans and what it's going to be going forward, Jim. No question about it.
We have this is going to be the acreage battle that we've talked about, Chip, because you need the beans and you need the corn, because so it's going to be a wrestle. And if I just do the math, and we could have to price ration, and boy, that's an explosive situation then.
Certainly is. Certainly is. You know, the number that I'm hearing now, Jim, is 91 million at a record corn yield. So 91 million planted corn acres. You harvest the traditional harvested acreage percent, 91.5%, 92%, something like that. But you got to have a 179 for a national average corn yield to keep supplies from getting too tight on corn. If you don't have at least 91 million and a record corn yield, I don't know where we're going, man.
Yeah, this is why people who do the math are saying buy the brakes, and we're going to have a relatively firm going into, and the spring planting season, the season, too much rain, too little rain, too much heat, too little heat. We've got to go through that too. So we've got several months here of very volatile markets, not only the weather and acreage front, but on the geopolitical front.
Exactly. And we can't forget that probably 40% of the safrinha corn crop in Brazil has been planted. They've still got a lot to go there, and a full growing season for that corn crop that's going to be really important to the global supplies. Okay. Geopolitical tensions, they continued over the weekend. There's I don't know where to go. The bad thing is, Jim, if we're trying to decide whether we should go to Russia or go to China first, but unfortunately, you can go to both at the same time.
Yeah, and it has been made clear by various U.S. defense analysts that I monitor and watch on some programs. This country is not geared up for a multifaceted, I won't say war, that's too strong, but situation around the world. We used to, but we're no longer in that situation. So we have to pick some spots there. But boy, as a history major, Chip, it's not usually a good sign. You think talking to each other countries is a good sign, but you've got the new German chancellor going to meet with Biden today at the White House. You have French leader Macron in Moscow today, and then going to Ukraine tomorrow, basically to defuse the Ukraine situation. And other officials are going around the world meeting. I think they're informing of what their intelligence is telling them.
Yeah, very troubling. One of the happenings over the weekend was that China and Russia basically revealed their view of a new world order, right?
Yes, on the one side they say that they'll continue the structure after World War II, but they more than signaled that there's spheres of influence from both
Mhm.
countries are going to be paramount in their judgment, and that's what it's been dubbed a new world order. I think we're seeing it unwind here over the past year and over the future years. Xi is making a power play as well, and we know Putin is also.
You know, the part of their plans include efforts to build up their countries, but those plans also include efforts to drag down the United States.
Uh,
And
yeah,
it's stated.
Yeah, with Putin's energy supplies, China, they announced the big energy package, but I don't think if Putin does indeed go into Ukraine, however fashion, I don't think China alone can provide the economic backstop for Russia. At least that's what experts are telling me. They'll help in a big way. We're beginning to see the split, Chip, not total, between the Asia and the U.S. and the Western world, and we're going to have years of having to build up our economy relative to the chip system, precious minerals that we've talked about, and that's actually needed anyway. We got way too global in our viewpoint, and we're seeing I would say some of the downsides of globalization right now. This just to arrive, situation. We're going to have to work ourselves out of that, and it'll take a few years.
Yeah. Okay. You said Russia into Ukraine in however fashion. Is there still a diplomatic avenue path?
I think there is
for Putin and Zelensky.
Yeah, some of the information coming out from U.S. intelligence briefings, Chip, signaled that they're trying to find a way for Putin to get the off ramp here by giving him some things that he can announce from his side, domestically, that he got some of the things that he wanted. At least that's the hope from the U.S. and Western allies side. But the meeting with Germany today, Germany's chancellor, Schultz, is going to be interesting because they've been reticent to deal directly in putting, military equipment into Ukraine. They're mainly putting more, military and aid to Lithuania. That's another hotspot, or growing hotspot. So, but yeah, there's always room for diplomacy. But you can see the U.S. side is hedged either way. Where Sullivan, the intelligence person for the Biden administration, said on the weekend news shows that the invasion could happen any day. So it's just an overhang in the market, the uncertainty. Traders on the one side are looking at the bullish information that we talked about earlier, but on the other side are looking at the some of the wild cards.
Okay. Yeah, Francis Macron making the trip to Russia and then onto Ukraine almost feels like he's going to be carrying a message of some sort.
It could be. It could be. Now he's been one of the ones early on that was hopeful for a diplomatic solution to this. So right. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, and he's facing a tough election. Macron is facing a tough election this fall as well. So
yeah, well, at least Biden's numbers may be low, but they're not as low as the 24% of Boris Johnson. That's even below Kamala Harris. You're in trouble.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, couple of things from last week, Jim, that I want to make sure that we touch on before we move forward. There was a farm bill hearing last week, and there's going to be more coming up.
Yeah, and we're going to have a big one with Robert Bonney from USDA, the climate czar, if you will, for USDA. Now the Republicans may pinpoint him as saying they want some more details out, and the day before a hearing, it's always interesting to me, Chip. You have Vilsack going to announce $1 billion program, climate practices, things like that, where they're tapping the Commodity Credit Corporation. I think he's in, I think Jefferson City, Missouri. He's going to be announcing more later this week. They'll probably ask him about that. But, you know, I give a lot of speeches, as you do, and I'm going out this week as well. A number of farmers have asked me recently, what about the future of used farm equipment? And I'm not machinery Pete here, okay? But they're thinking, what's the vulnerability for all this older used equipment that's still out there? Will the government come at them relative to carbon mitigation? I'm starting to get that question. I don't think that they want to take that on, but that is a question out there that I'm getting from producers.
Boy, I tell you what, you think Canada's dealing with the revolt from the truckers, try to take away the old tractors from U.S. farmers.
Yes, absolutely. You know, the first question I ask any farmer, whatever age, and I love to ask the older producers, what was the first tractor you ever drove? Yeah. And within a nanosecond, they have the make and model number.
77 Oliver.
Yeah, see there. Yeah. So yeah, and I can't tell them 100%, but I think that they're going to be so busy in carbon mitigation implementation that they're not going to want to deal with that. And I also hear, now this is one for a possible message to Republicans. A number of farmers have come up to me and also said, you know, I keep hearing Vilsack and others say the next revenue stream in agriculture could be this carbon mitigation. Let's not be too negative on this. And, you know, because they can see some legacy funding payments for all those people who did no-till. And other aspects, already. Yes, and the still unveiled carbon mitigation programs, and I think that's a fair point. You know that they put in the to be renamed and revised Build Back Better program over $20 billion in conservation. So there's a pot of money here. So I think there should be at least a level perspective of, let's see the game plan here.
Well, okay, I'm going to break out one of the concerns that I've got about carbon issues and government payments. We've been talking so much about, is USDA going to be involved as a market maker in the carbon markets? I think what they're probably going to do, and it wouldn't surprise me a bit if this is written into farm policy somehow, some way, is if you're not participating, you're not going to be eligible for any government payments.
Ooh, there's they would get pushed back, I know, from the Republicans in Congress on that one, but there will be efforts in that way.
You darn right.
The carrot and the stick. That's the old approach to any type of policy. And I have been hearing, Chip, that I don't know whether you've heard the phrase green financing.
Yeah, oh yeah.
When these things go, there could be a directive to banks that they would get an incentive, if you will, some type of payment to reduce the interest rate for farmers and producers and livestock producers if they have best practices, if you will.
Right.
That's another thing. So I would watch that as this thing unfolds. We need to see details. And and even Vilsack says that. And that's what's part of these pilot projects he's going to start unveiling, perhaps as soon as today, that we're going to begin to see some of the features of how this program could look in the future.
Yeah, they'll continue to bill it as incentives to participate in the green movement, but in reality, they're a punishment for not.
Yeah, it's a backdoor approach to control.
Yeah, something that we got to watch. Okay, if you want to participate in the conversation, we'd sure love to have you do that. There is a comments tab on the right side of your screen. Just click on that. Should open up a dialog box for you at the bottom of the page, and you can send us your comments. Another thing from last week, very quickly, Jim, is the vote at NCBA convention, National Cattlemen's Beef Association. The membership voted, and the market committee voted to strengthen policy that that prevents NCBA from supporting mandated cash trade of any kind. It's setting up the Fisher-Grassley bill for a heated debate, or I should say a more heated debate than what I think was anticipated.
And it should be debated. And, you know, it's that word mandate, Chip. We're seeing it across relative to the mask and vaccines. And there's a groundswell now in this country and actually the world. You know, look at Canada, the demonstrations. So I think unless the Grassley-Fisher approach is significantly modified, it's not going anywhere. Now, if they want to get steps on this, I think everybody would go along with that. But when you have Farm Bureau and the biggest cattle producers against the mandated cash, it's just not going to happen.
Right. Right. Yeah. Real quickly here, Gary chimed in on here, referring back to what we were just talking about. On the financing side, ag financing is going to come under ESG scoring. Could be scary stuff. That's the environmental, social, and governance. Environmental, social governance that we're watching there very closely. Okay. Jim,
and then we have another one, Chip, that we can get into.
You bet.
Will there be a push to use something similar to sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, higher blends or whatnot to power farm equipment?
Yes.
Yeah. This whole SAF. Now, I remember on Pro Farmer, they commented on a private industry analysis saying this renewable diesel, or SAF, was being overhyped. But boy, the more I checked into it, I'm not quite so sure, because again, that word incentives is going to come up. These airlines, Delta, United, etc., are going to want, once this mitigation program really gets into effect, they're going to want to need some offsets. And if they get an incentive to utilize SAF in fuel, of which they use a lot of jet fuels, 18 billion gallons, I think I looked in a year's time. That's a game changer if that goes. And I'll let you talk relative to the farm equipment end.
Yeah, I think they probably will incentivize. I'll use that word right now. I don't know if it'll be a punishment yet, but they probably will provide some sort of a tax incentive to use more of the renewable diesel versus even biodiesel in the process. So I don't know if how quickly we'll get there, but I think we probably will. I'm working up a column right now for Farm Journal, Jim, and I've got there's 10 new soybean crush facilities 9 new facilities and 1 major expansion to an existing facility that by 2025 is going to bring on 400 million bushels of soybean crush capacity.
Yeah.
What do you think that's going to do in the market?
Yeah. And you don't spend 250 to $300 million on some of these plants without a pretty good solid foundation of a market in the future.
Well, and in many cases, there's a refiner, a Phillips, a Marathon, one of the traditional oil refiners is participating in the investment in these crush facilities, and they, in exchange of the investment, they're going to get 100% of the soybean oil that is produced from those facilities.
Yes. You know, and this is why
it's a different structure than what ethanol was.
It is a more widespread structure of support and, strange bedfellows, if you will. And this is why the Environmental Protection Agency, in their call for public comment on the latest renewable fuel standard proposals, asked for public comment on the food versus fuel debate relative to renewable diesel. That was it wasn't written about a lot, Chip, but boy, that was an important thing for the EPA to advance that argument, because you knew it was coming. So I applaud them for at least raising it, but I don't know what they're going to deal with that.
Right. Yeah, you can ask the questions. You may not like the answers that they're going to get out of that, because it's already shown up. The when you look at the rise in veg oil prices around the globe, it's already having an effect, and it's not even and the production of the renewable diesel and the SAF and marine fuel and everything hasn't really even taken off yet. And when it does, we need to double the amount of soybean oil that we're going to produce, and we can't do that.
See, this is where, remember on AgriTalk on Friday, we talked, me and you, I think you disagreed with me, that I think we're going into a higher range of prices for corn and soybeans. And I think this is one of the key building blocks for that. If it were to occur. I get it. And it's not that I disagree. It's just that I won't say it. I mean, 1995 taught me a lesson early on in my career, Jim. I am not going to say, oh, look at this. We've moved to a new and higher pricing plateau. Yes. It's like a Farm Journal cover many years ago. Have yields plateaued?
Yeah.
You don't do those covers.
No, that's exactly right. Okay. What else this week? I mean, are we making much progress on the supply chain and the port congestion?
In steps. But again, most of the business people, I say it's just going to take a while, and that means into early next year, Chip. But some progress. I'm not going to poo-poo. We need some, better news. I'm not going to call it, good news for sure. But I think that they're learning some of the reasons behind, and Congress is starting to get into the act of this competition bill, China competition bill, but I think that has its own problems once it gets to the Senate. So to answer your question, it's improving, but not near to the degree that we need. So let's see with warmer weather this spring if that's going to, loosen some things up. But we've got some pretty high shipping rates, going on out there in the trucking industry, et cetera. So, of course, this week we have the WASDE report, the World Supply and Demand reports, and the big focus on as we began with the South American crops. Traders, whatever USDA says on Brazil, I've talked to too many, whether USDA is right or not, they're going to lower it a couple million tons from what USDA announces.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I mean, we pushed too hard to the downside last year, USDA did.
They'll do it again.
And they had to bring it back up.
They'll do it again. But we've got some weather coming up here, as you said, some entrenched weather on that one. A question I also want to point out, I do want to do a shout out. I was in for, Signal to Noise listeners, met them in Vegas. They're from Wyoming, Cindy Fulton, Pidge and Cindy Fulton Farms. Their whole family was there, Chip, and they wanted to applaud what you and I have been doing, and I applaud them back for being listeners. And I asked if there was anything else we needed to do, and they said just keep it up, keep up the conversation. Cool. So that's good. And they also like the Farmer Forum on AgriTalk. That is a popular.
Oh, good.
Feature.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the highlights of the week for me on second half of the morning show on Wednesdays. That's a good time. Jim, what else are you watching at USDA this week?
Well, other than the crop reports, always the unveiling of the programs. We did get more information out late last week from Robert Bonney on the WIP Plus program, and they're rearing to go on the initial phase on the $750 million livestock portion. So they're beginning to roll that out with the big payments to producers coming in. I think Vilsack told us in sometime in the spring. So that's an always key one, because a lot of listeners out there are always emailing me questions on WIP 2. I did get a number of questions also in my recent speeches on how many Democrats are really into this AOC ilk camp relative to the Bernie Sanders very liberal. And when I did some checking, it's only 11%, Chip, of Democrats, but yet that's
very
the
noisy.
focus of the very noisy.
Very noisy, 11%.
So that's the perspective. You can be only 11%, but if you have that megaphone on Twitter or whatever, but I think it's beginning. We haven't heard so much from AOC lately. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
You know, she's going out and campaigning for a number of lawmakers. The other thing I've noticed relative to the election, and my good friend David Wasserman from the Cook Political Report has pointed this out, the Democrats are flexing their muscles in what could have been a very negative situation for Democrats, what with redistricting.
In New York.
You've had court in New York especially, but you've had court battles that have turned against some of the initial state drawings in Pennsylvania and other states that the Republicans could have gained some seats. So, you know, I'm not saying it's, you know, it's going to be fought in the courts again, you know, relative to the House. But this is a fundamental change, what's going on in our court system relative to redistricting.
Gotcha. Okay. A deadline today for public comment on the Biden administration's plan to return to the pre-2015 definition of the waters of the U.S.
Yeah. Well, let's see what they're going to announce. Okay. We already know what the public comments should be saying. We've been through several iterations of this regulatory program. So I want to see how onerous it gets again, because as I said before, we had a very rigid program under President Obama. Then we had a farmer-friendly, quite flexible approach by the Trump administration. Now we'll probably get the mixture of the two in whatever the Biden administration announces.
Okay.
But we need to see it. And hopefully it'll come within the next few months, but they're not putting a date on it, which again goes into, I want to see the real verdicts of the EPA, Michael Regan, because his report card is still out because of what he's done relative to the RFS.
He came in as a preseason All-American.
Yes.
You know, I mean, the credentials were there. He was making all the right moves. He was contacting the right people, reaching out to industry leaders, and everything looked so good. And it's almost like he's gone dark and won't communicate any longer. It's shocking to me.
He's a different Michael Regan that at least I saw when he was in the environmental section in the state of North Carolina, Chip, that at least suggests to me that he could be being told to go a certain way that he didn't think when he took that job. That's my personal perspective. I can't 100% guarantee that, but the trend is not good because, another question I get in my meetings, these chemicals, what's the future of all these chemicals that farmers need and use? And again, the verdict is still out. I think it's EPA's bias to get rid of a lot of them.
Oh, I do too. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. $52.5 million paid by JBS USA in the beef price fixing investigation as a settlement. We don't even know what they're settling, Jim.
Yeah.
We've got nothing from DOJ.
Maybe we'll get it out. I know that, and I want to be clear on this I'm not a lawyer, but usually the companies, and I think JBS in this case, they didn't acknowledge that they did anything wrong, but they're working with the Justice Department. Now, usually an initial firm that works with the Justice Department in a sensitive issue gets a lower fine, if you will. And that's why some people looked at this and say, oh, this was way too low. You don't know until we get an announcement from either one relative to further details, what other information is being provided. So yes, we have not heard the end of this story whatsoever.
Yeah. They may have paid $52.5 million so that they didn't have to pay $525.
Yes, as you know, it's almost like dealing with the CFTC, when you've
Yeah.
been charged with something, even if you think in your heart of hearts you're right, the legal cost will eat you up, and so you settle.
That's right.
And that's what happens a lot with the Justice Department rulings as well.
Okay. All right. Unless you've got any last items, I think we're going to wrap things up.
I'm just looking at the latest things. Those are all the questions. Again, thank you. Keep your comments coming in, either when we're on the program or when we're off. And I think we're going to be on Monday again. I think I'm back in town here. I'll be in Missouri at the Missouri Pork Producers. I'll be in California for the curb meeting of, crop insurance. And then I'll be in Fargo Friday and Saturday. I think I speak there Friday night to a crop insurance firm. So gotcha. I'm going to be amongst them as well as you, but I'll be back the following week for Signal to Noise, Jim.
Yep, I'll be traveling on Monday the 14th as well. Happy Valentine's Day, Jim. I probably won't see you that day.
That's all I need is more chocolate.
Yeah, exactly. Soybeans 25 to 30 cents higher. Corn is 8 to 9 cents higher. Wheat is even trading to the upside. We've got another positive day going. Hog market has just opened up. There's another market that we haven't talked a lot about, Jim, but it is making some big strides to the upside.
And we didn't talk about the shocking jobs report
right.
Friday, Chip. They changed, the Department of Labor changed some of the seasonal factors. So I think that was added to a lot of the numbers that we saw. I'm not going to poo-poo a good report. It was far better than the so-called experts expected. And I did check into why the White House was so cautionary about this. They feared this report. One of the private industry analysts that they use so much, I won't mention the name, was really cautioning the White House on this one. He was just wrong. So that's why it wasn't that they wanted to fool the public. At least that's the information I got from some White House people. But that was a very shocking report, but it showed a number of cases where the wage rates are at going way up, and shows you the power of that worker right now that he has at this particular time.
Absolutely.
So I did want to mention that from last week.
Yep. And we'll have some CPI numbers coming out later this week.
Yes.
All right. Have a great week, everybody. Keep watching for those signals.